Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CERTCON 2021, the virtual conference where we are celebrating you, the everyday CERT. Thank you for joining us at the 10th CERT conference in the National Capital Region. This session is featured speaker, Dr. Josh Bobko. His topic, Confident Responders and Adaptive Leaders. My name is Jerry Anderson, and I am joined by Alex Van Veen. We are your host and moderator for this session. Our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Josh Bobko, is co-founder and president of the nonprofit firstcareprovider.org. The goal of First Care Provider is to expand effective trauma treatment education to local communities. The cornerstone of that effort is the Stop the Bleed program, which encourages bystanders to become trained, equipped, and empowered to help in a bleeding emergency before professional help arrives. Dr. Bobko is an Air Force veteran and a board-certified emergency medicine physician. He is an internationally renowned speaker and a national authority on high-threat civilian medicine. He has consulted for numerous governmental agencies, managed care organizations, and institutes of higher learning. His publications are reference material for several current medical courses offered worldwide, and these are just a few of his many accomplishments. Now, here's Dr. Bobko.
Thanks, Jerry. Just want to get a quick thumbs up for our sound check. Everything looks good? All right. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I trained in DC, spent a lot of years there. I worked at Inova Fairfax when I was a resident, so I'm kind of familiar with the area, although I must say that I couldn't take the cold weather and the hot summers, so I moved to Southern California where, it's the same weather all the time. Again, it's a real honor to speak. The CERT community is such an important community worldwide, and really, I would almost say the forefounders of the whole Stop the Bleed mentality and initiative. You guys have been doing this for far longer than I think you have been given credit for, and you have a far deeper impact and reach than I think people realize. So just a little bit about me. I appreciate the intro. Jerry, when you say those things, it almost doesn't sound, I can't even believe that that's me. I feel like you're talking about somebody else because I'm just kind of Josh to my friends. But I am pretty proud of our organization. We were people like yourselves that were working in our communities and educating our communities, and started several years ago wanting to really provide a better product. And what we realized is that everybody was kind of trying to approach the same problem, but we were all doing it slightly differently. And we thought, hey, if we build this organization, kind of an umbrella that we can bring good people together with good ideas and put that into one place that other people can use, we can really make a difference. So that's what we've tried to do with First Care. Again, we're a 501c3 organization. You can go on our website and look at everything. I don't have really anything to disclose financially from this. I would, however, like to talk about how we do things. And I'm sure some of you are going to want to interact with the chat. It's a lot less fun to not be in person because you don't get the energy and we don't have that direct contact. But I would encourage you to please, if you have questions as I'm moving along, go ahead and put it in the chat. They're being monitored, and we'll get to breaking points where we can address any specific questions. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this diagram. It is completely stolen from a gentleman named Simon Sinek. He is a leadership management expert. He has worked with numerous organizations, from government agencies to DoD agencies to business agencies. And what's really interesting is how they have pared down the focus of what these organizations that do really good things are approaching problems. And he's designed this diagram that's very simple but very telling. And I think when it comes to training, we use a lot of these same techniques. We know what we want to train. When we're going to train our communities or we're going to train our team, we'll say, hey, we want to do XYZ training. We want to do some refresher training. We want to do some equipment training. We want to do some new person training. And we know what it is that we want to get done. I think where the critical part, oh, I just saw the slides aren't advancing. Do you see the CERT beginning training?
No, I don't. You may still need to dive into presentation mode.
All right, stand by. I apologize. How about now?
Yep, full screen looks good.
Advance?
It did.
Okay, good. I apologize for that. Thank you, everybody. Again, coming back to this diagram, it's a sort of a bullseye. The idea is most organizations that are doing some sort of training, they have an idea of what they want to accomplish. And that's sort of that outside ring. You know, you can go down a list and say what we want to accomplish. Here's some CERT basic trainings from the different units, from the ReadyGov website that basically lays out, here is the capability and the information that we have to impart to CERT members. Now, how is where people usually get I don't want to say stuck, but that's usually where we spend our focus. We want to train the most, awesome scenario. We're going to use all the best equipment. We're going to go get, this agency involved. We're going to bring this mannequin. We're going to have this person from whatever place that we've interacted with before to come teach us, and then we're going to run our scenarios, and that is good most of the time. But what we would like to focus on, particularly in first care, and what I think that will really help a lot of organizations is, you can see how is in all of the literature for most organizations, but what we don't get to is the why, right? Why are we doing this exercise today? Are we just doing it because it's that time of year? Is the purpose of our training because it's been 6 months and we have to do the training? Is the reason that we're doing this earthquake scenario because we've had an earthquake, or is it just something we haven't trained before? And I think that's really where we can make some progress. Now, if you look at the CERT landscape, I think defining what our end goal is for training is critical. I think a lot of times we go into training because we have a training schedule and we have a training manager. And I think sometimes what's less well defined is the why. How do you measure your success? What metrics are you using to show that you've gotten there? That can be something as simple as having a feedback session with your fire chief, your police chief, your emergency manager. How is your area viewing your role as the CERT team? This is really, I think, something that kind of goes off the usual script. And I think this is where, as we define that why, now we can start working on, implementing some steps to actually develop that confidence and develop that leadership. And that's much different than just checking off, yes, we've met this requirement, or, we have, now we've got everybody at this level. So that's sort of the background. Now, that frames how we look at training in general. And where I want to take us is now into the, what can we do about it, right? We know how people think. Psychologists have been studying critical decision-making for years. We have something called a two-system problem-solving mechanism that our brains use when we're processing information. And in order to build a training program and develop leadership, we have to understand those processes and the critical thinking, how those critical decisions are made. There's a really good book. I'll have some references just at the bottom, and I can provide more references at the end of the lecture if people need it and people are interested. But I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is a very common psychological, I don't want to say test, but riddle. And what it demonstrates is sort of that two-pathway mindset to solving problems. There is essentially two answers for every problem. And what we've got to do is see both sides. Now, some of you that may have some familiarity with psychology may have seen this before. It's very famous. It's been replicated in economics. It's been replicated. I read a study of circuit court judges given the same problem, medical students given the same problem, and the trends are very universal. So if I ask someone a question and say the bat and the ball costs $1.10, and a bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Now, I'm just looking at the chat over here. I think Staff Ninja would maybe say 10 cents. I think a lot of us would fall into that trap. You know, it seems very straightforward, very easy. It's $1.10. The bat is $1 more than the ball. So obviously the ball is 10 cents. But that answer, no offense, Staff Ninja, is not correct. Now, this is what's called heuristics. These are the quick decisions that get us through the daily life, and we'll talk about those, but sometimes they can lead us astray. And what I would propose, my hypothesis is, this is what happens in training. If you step back and you say, the ball is 10 cents, and you look at this problem, and you see right there on the screen that the bat is $1 more than the ball, then that means that the bat would cost $1.10. So by definition, the bat and the ball would cost $1.20. So it can't be 10 cents. The answer is 5 cents. Is everybody tracking? It seems like, you know I'm not the only, I've been through a whole heck of a lot of school and a whole bunch of leadership programs at the academy and whatnot. And it took me 35 minutes to sit down and do this. And you're in good company, because 75% of Harvard graduates get this wrong as well. It's the way our minds are triggered. The ball costs 5 cents. The bat, when I present this problem, the only thing people see is that the bat costs $1. And then they stop looking at the rest of it, right? They don't see $1 more. And we all fall into the same trap. Let me give you another example. It's pretty neat, huh? Now, I don't know. So, you know, I'm actually giving another lecture, and I titled it "A Bat, a Ball, and a Tourniquet: How You Can Change Your Training." And I'm going to give that to a bunch of hardcore medical people. And I'm guarantee you they will fall into the same trap that you and I both did. System 1 and System 2 is, again, sort of the overriding concept. I put this picture of the shark on the screen, and another example of this System 1. System 2 is, you know, if I ask you what animal on Earth kills the most people every year, you know, I can influence you. I can create a bias in my training to make you say, man, it's going to be sharks, or it's going to be polar bears, or it's going to be, I don't know, crazy porcupines. Those would all be wrong. When you stop and you sit back, yeah, humans is probably correct, but the actual answer is mosquitoes. Mosquitoes kill more people on Earth than any other animal. And it's obviously because of the bloodborne diseases they can pass. But this is where, when you're put on the spot and you're asked a question, your brain creates pathways that give you an answer right now. That is your System 1 thinking. That is the reason why you can drive your car and talk on the phone and drink your coffee and tell your kid to shut up all at the same time, right? That's how we get through life. The world is a crazy place that's happening all the time. And if we became overly pensive about it and we had to analyze every problem, we could not be effective. But we do need the System 2 to kick in so that we can analyze that information, look at the problem from a new perspective, and that's usually where you get the advancement and the progression in your thinking. I know this is a bit abstract. I know this is not your typical CERT lecture, but again, we're talking about developing leaders, and these are critical skills for people that are going to take on leadership positions in their community. Again, just another way to look at it. System 1 is for common problems. It's for common situations. It's for available resources. It's when I'm in the ER and somebody comes in with a broken ankle. You know, I hate to say I don't think about it, but I get the x-ray, I look for the places, and then I put them in a splint and I send them home. There's not a lot of critical evaluation of that at the very initial stages. The issue becomes when you have either the same problem in an unusual situation, or you have a complex problem, or you don't have the resources or the x-ray. And man, I don't know, when your team has gone and tried to do some search and rescue, if this is a fracture, or if this is a sprain, or if this is something more serious than it is, how do you process that? And are you even acknowledging that before you move down the wrong path? Now, you know, there's benefits and risks to both systems, right? The benefit of system 1 is it's very fast. The problem with system 1 is if you make the wrong decision at the outset, you have sent the train down the wrong track, and it's very hard to recover from. That is super important for a leader in the community to realize before you start allocating resources. System 2 obviously takes more time, and if you allocate too much resources to the problem, then you're ineffective and inefficient. Now, I'm going to give you just a common example, earthquake scenario. We all train it very frequently. It's something that is near and dear to all of our hearts out here in California. It's funny because, you know, on the East Coast, when you're training, you don't train a lot of earthquake scenarios because they don't happen. And out here, you know, you have policemen learning about what to do in earthquakes in the community. And it is something that I think most CERT teams are familiar with, but you can substitute that for hurricane. You know, I grew up in Florida, so we would get a hurricane 1 or 2 every year. And, you know, in DC, I don't know what you would, maybe civil unrest. I don't know what your scenario there would be. But when something happens, as CERT members, we're trained to switch on. Most members will go get their bag. They will put on their identifiers. They will begin trying to sort out what they have in front of them and trying to link up maybe with first responders or local leadership. It's even better if you have multiple CERT members in the same area that are collaborating and can really start to multiply the effect. What I would say is, in that scenario, that's the scenario we train for. That's what we have in our mind. But I think that what we need to kind of step back and be aware of is, are we training to respond to these things, or are we actually training to solve problems, right? And I think that that's where the real key to advancing our training and really fostering leadership within the teams can advance. Within First Care, we like to use something called the third person rule. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. I do a lot of work sort of on a tactical side with some teams, and everybody gets really focused on, whenever doc's around, they really want to impress me with their medical know-how. And what happens is they sort of lose the forest for the trees. I'm sure you guys have all run into it when you've put on training yourselves. And what we've sort of coined and what we've started moving to is this third person rule. It can be the fourth person rule, depending on how you want to set it up. But realizing that our failures in scenarios when we're exercising don't come from ignorance. Our failures in the scenario usually comes because we did not consider the correct option. Like, it's usually there in front of us, but we're moving too fast, we're too rushed, we're trying to get to the protocol we're familiar with, and we don't take that second to step back, take a deep breath, integrate that system to approach, and really start to consider the options that we have at our disposal. So I'm going to show you a quick exercise, and you know, I'm going to talk about what you can do with training moving forward to improve your outcomes. This is an exercise that we did up in a small town in Alaska. I won't say what town, but if anybody recognizes this room, you're probably right. This was in a hospital, which is the largest building in the town. They don't have CERT teams. They have communities of 1,500 people where they are their own CERT team. Everybody at the hospital, you know, is essentially going to respond because this is all they have, right? They have a department, a police department with 6 officers. They have a fire department that has, I think, 10 plus a whole bunch of volunteers, but basically everybody volunteers for something because these are small, tight communities. And we went up there and we were teaching them our first care provider, you know, program, our race to safety program, which is simply, and I'll step back, take an aside. First care, we teach 2 things. We teach what to do in an emergency, and we teach what to do if there is a medical emergency. And that's all we teach. And we teach it in a very specific way. And that's where sort of the link to Stop the Bleed came from. But this was a scenario we put on. And I want to after action ourselves because we designed this to be an earthquake. And what I'm going to do is play this video, and then I want you to look at how the people that are there are kind of acting. I'm going to turn this down for a moment so it doesn't play in my ear, and I'm going to advance this. So now you'll see some people start walking in here shortly. And I want you to notice this. I mean, this probably looks like some of the training you've done with your community. And I want you to really look at, you know, who's moving on that system 1 pathway and who's maybe being more analytical and looking around. You know, a lot of times we create this culture where everybody wants to show us as the administrators of the exercise how well we do our medicine or how well we do our rescue or how well we do our evacuation or extraction. And what you see is, for example, these 5 ladies are working on 1 person under a table. That's extremely inefficient. And that's my failure as a trainer to put them in that situation, because what's happened is I have impressed on them that the most important thing is for them to look like they're doing something right. And what I haven't done is impressed on maybe the other 4 of them to go open up the loading bay door to that bottom hallway, to get some cones out so I can tell the ambulance where to back in, to get some tables out of the way, to turn on some lights, to bring some of these rolling chairs to start moving people so we don't have to leave them underneath tables. And that is my failing as a trainer. I've accentuated to them that system 1 type thinking, and they are doing exactly what I've taught them. And I think if I was going to do it again, I'd work on some of the techniques that I'm going to show you later to try to make sure that it's good to have some people in the system 1, but you need some other people in that system 2. And that is that 3rd man rule or 3rd person rule that we're talking about. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to stop there for a moment. Maybe if there's anything in the chat that needs to come up, you let me know. Alex, you give me a thumbs up if it's time to move on. Otherwise, I'll keep going. All right, so let me get a quick sip of water. Let's think about the training that we're doing within our communities, within our teams. Before you answer, our training is think about the last time you guys got together and think about how the training went and think about the culture that you created. Did you get everyone to really analyze themselves and interact, or were there those flies on the wall that were there, had a good attitude, came with the right equipment, but you didn't really get a chance to look at? right? You didn't really get to put them in that scenario. There's some pitfalls with training, and I'll just go over some common ones that I've found from my experience, and I think maybe you'll relate to a lot of them. You know, as trainers, when we're trying to develop our team members, we're trying to develop that critical thinking ability, and in order so that each individual can take on a leadership role. But a lot of times what happens is we think that our students are going to develop that critical thinking ability on their own, right? We are going to provide them with clinical skills, and somehow through whatever grace, whatever time, whatever experience, they're going to develop their own ability to make decisions. And I think that's a fallacy. I think we have to actively work on having people recognize their strengths, their weaknesses, and stop assuming that the students are going to recognize this is distracting information and this is good information, and I'm going to know how to tell the difference. We need to stop assuming that people are going to be able to look at their own processing of the information, and stop accepting the assumptions that I make as a trainer. I want my students to say, well, why are we doing this? You know, I think that's one of the things that I've sort of realized working with some of the younger members of the teams that I'm associated with. You know, the late 20s mindset is very different than the mid 40s mindset, right? Why are we doing this? Why are we using this? Why? And those are really important things that I think as trainers, we don't ask ourselves before we set up these scenarios. Some of the pitfalls with the scenarios that we use. Again, I like to use my own examples. So the picture is a scenario of someone in a clinical setting that uses a stethoscope and wears scrubs and absolutely approaching this medical problem incorrectly, right? There's a ineffective tourniquet that they couldn't figure out, and so they just went to what they knew and put a big bandage on something. Now, they are doing what they feel comfortable doing. What I would tell you is I have put them in that situation. Now, this may be a pre-test. I hope this is not a post-test, but what I, again, want to call attention to is we designed these scenarios based on vignettes of things that have happened, that we've been told, that after action that we've read about, that we already know the answer. We already know the variables. And what we end up doing a lot of times is designing these scenarios to test people's clinical skills and not the decisions they're making. I'm sure if I'd have told this person in the picture, look at what you're doing, they would have kicked into that system 2 mindset and said, you know what, this doesn't make a lot of sense. So we have to get away from creating that culture of looking busy, right? Like, I'm using my hands over here, I'm doing something. I don't want the instructor to get on me. I want to be in the good guy group that doesn't get attention. And I think we need to move towards making sure that we are in the group that actually is learning. And I think, again, one of the places I see this as I go around the world with Stop the Bleed is we've gotten to a point where every police officer in the world thinks that every gunshot wound needs a tourniquet. And that is just simply not true. And how did we get there? Well, whenever someone puts a tourniquet on, we immediately reinforce that type 1 thinking, and we give them a life-saving medal, and we say, good job, even though that is not the correct answer and potentially could be dangerous. Now, I don't want to get into, oh, tourniquets aren't dangerous. We could talk about that another time. But again, are we teaching the right things, and are we reinforcing system 1, or are we looking more globally at the 2-system decision-making? So let me advance here, and I'll take a quick pause. Alex, I think something just popped up here, but I didn't look at it. I'm just going to leave this quote for you. If you want to jump in, I'll see what I can do.
We have 2 questions. The first one is reference system 1 and system 2, differences between them. What are they? Uniqueness of character or specific ways you train people, 3rd-person rule, and pertaining to what, systems 1 and 3, etc. And the second question, Doctor, is regarding crowd mentality.
Great.
Crowd
Okay, those are good
mentality.
questions. What this is what I'll tell you. So again, the system one is your brain's sort of intuitive reaction to a problem. We'll get to it again in a little bit. I think it'll be more clear. But when something happens, that first instinct is your system one. Okay. The system two is after the fact, you go home and you sleep on it, or you go out to dinner, or you go for a jog, and then a few hours later, boom, the light bulb goes on and you say, you know what, that's what I should have done. That's your system two. It's that analysis after the fact versus that initial gut instinct. So I hope that clears it up. I'm going to talk about some tools we can use later on in your training that you can implement. That's literally the crux of my lecture at the end. And then the crowd mentality. I love this question. There's a term called cooperative conformity, and you guys got to really start reading psychology. It's fascinating stuff because everything is psychology, from politics to, again, decisions that we make. But you know, it sort of leads me back to this quote: making the wrong decision feels the same as making the right decision. We just don't know the outcome yet, right? We all make a decision. And I think when it comes to the crowds, it takes very few people to make a difference within a large group. And there are statistics, and there are different studies that will quote different numbers. But in general, it takes 2 to 3 people to change the group mentality of a large number. Now, if your group's only 3 people and you have 1 person moving purposefully and 2 more that aren't, those 2 people will follow the 1. It's a little hard to be 1 when you're in a crowd of 100. So you need more. But yes, we are trying to emphasize that take a second, take a breath, look at what the world is giving you, making a good decision, and then naturally the crowd will follow that. So I'm going to just move on. If that helps, good. If it doesn't, we can address it a little bit later on. One thing I can tell you is 100% true that scenario you just trained is not going to happen again. It's already happened. You already know what's happened. You already know the answers. You already practiced it. But 100% chance that something like it will happen. It's going to be almost the same problem, but different. And so if we get used to answering the problem one certain way, are we going to misapply to this new scenario, to these new variables? And that's where we got to focus moving forward. We need to embrace that uncertainty in training. Don't get comfortable in training. You know, a lot of people have probably seen the patches that say, you know, embrace the suck, right? There's always something that's not going to go right, Murphy, whatever you want to call it. Don't think of the uncertainty and your maybe cognitive pause as an inadequacy. We need to look at that as a badge of honor, of sophistication. I am willing, you know, I got to be the lecturer on a lot of pediatric trauma because when I would go to meetings or I'd be in groups, nobody wanted to talk about it, right? And so you get to these positions where when you're not comfortable with something, you need to focus on that, right? When you're studying for your GMAT or your LSAT or your MCAT or your SAT, a lot of times we study the stuff we're good at because we want to feel good about ourselves. And I would tell you, take your test, miss your questions, take all the ones you got right and never look at them again. Work on the stuff you're not good at, because that's how you get the problems that you would be solving with your system 2 to now become system 1. Now that might be a little meta for everyone, but as we develop a way to respond to different problems, we now can feel comfortable and confident in how we solve those problems. We need to look for more problems and more complicated problems and new scenarios to move forward. I think that's really how we're going to develop the confidence within our membership. And you know, this is a tough thing for trainers when we're developing leadership. When you're the team leader or you are the element leader, unit leader, you know, that critical decision process is very difficult to assess. It's very difficult to detect. And so what we're trying to do is balance that efficiency and that problem solving. And a lot goes into that. So I believe it was James's question initially, here's a giant slide with all the things that go into what psychologists think decision making is all about. And I like to use giant words because it makes me feel really smart. So if you look at sort of the big blocks, I put EBM, that stands for evidence-based medicine or evidence-based practice. TTPs, your techniques, tactics, techniques, and protocols. Heuristics, that's your bias, that's your I've seen this before. Your experience, I've done this 800 times at 47 different deployments. And then we take all of this input and our brain has to process it. And so we apply something called Bayesian reasoning, intuitive thinking, hypothetical deductive analysis, and then it all gets swirled around in something called metacognition. So I know you guys are all familiar with all these terms, so I'm just going to move on. I'm just kidding. We'll make it a little bit simpler. So there's always the evidence, right? There's the stuff, the after actions, there's the medical guidelines, they're the things that we can prove and have been proven. We're aware of those. Then we have our protocols from our team, how we do things locally. Then we all have certain biases, right? That idea of how I think something's going to turn out based on what has happened before, and then our experiences, the things that maybe I have done before, and applying them to what's happening now. And then our brain again has to use that information. We apply logic. Hey, does this make sense? We use that gut instinct, right? Like, this is just my initial reaction. And then, hopefully, as we're developing our leadership and our critical thinking mindset, we start what-ifing the problem, right? Or in medicine, a lot of times what we use is, what's the worst thing that could happen? And having that help drive, if I make this decision, what if? And then at some point, the metacognition turns into that aha moment. Now, metacognition is just a psychological term. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. But we have to have some process to reflect on how we're thinking and deliberate our own reasoning. And that is how this information gets coalesced into progress. So that's a whole lot of words to say. Again, you have a problem at work, or something happens on the drive home, or something happens in the exercise, and you're thinking about it, and you're kind of stuck. And then you put it down and you walk away, and then suddenly it hits you. And we need to be cognizant of building that into our training so that our students have the opportunity to assimilate what we're trying to get to and really accentuate that system two thinking. So back to the initial question, how do we implement these things? Well, there's a couple things that we do in first care, something called an intention, right? That, I don't know how many people here meditate. I'm not gonna go totally California on it, but maybe you've heard the joke about, in California, there's nothing that you can't solve with a combination of yoga, avocado, and marijuana. So this is kind of taking my California sort of bias and saying, we need to do a little bit of reflection, use something from meditation called an intention, which is, that 5 minutes before you actually go into your exercise, or before you go into a learning environment, or before you go into a training environment, to say, I'm going to have an open mindset, not a closed mindset. I'm going to deliberately work to not jump to conclusions. I'm going to listen and learn something different than I did, and not just go through this exercise and get it over with. I did the same thing before I gave this lecture today. And I think it really helps, because my heart rate before this lecture was about 145, and now it's down to a stable 128. Video analysis, that's a great tool that we can use. And I will tell you that I can take the saltiest of salty medics and scare the crap out of them by just holding my phone up and say, I'm going to video you while you do this. Suddenly, boom, the brakes go on, you know, they slow down, they start thinking. And that's important because, again, we have medical literature saying that people that are being evaluated, that know they're being evaluated, perform better. So the simple threat of video analysis really improves performance. Now, you can use it or not use it. You can use it to try to make people more stressed. But what I would say is, again, as we're trying to change culture, use that video, have people be comfortable being videoed, and then have them explain after the scenario what they were doing in that situation. Your students are going to be much more critical than we're going to be on them. And what happens is memories that are tied to an emotion become much more strongly bound within our mind. And so if you put on a scenario, you video them, you have them look at the video and discuss their analytics, that is going to be a much stronger learning tool than just letting them move forward. Then we need a little bit of reflection, time to sit back, get that aha moment. Gotcha, Jerry. And then we need to solicit some feedback, right? Not just, hey, what's the best thing about training? What's the worst thing about training? But actually talk to them maybe a week later and say, what do you remember? I'm going to just quick show a video. On the left, you can see some people that we had trained. This was a group of community members. They're actually teachers. And on the right, you have another group of teachers that had gone through our course, and you can sort of see the confidence difference between the two. The ones on the left have all the first aid training that you need to be a teacher in the public school system. The ones on the right, you know, again, they're not necessarily moving fast, but they're moving with a purpose. They're looking at the problems and they're analyzing the situation much more readily than are the people on the left. And we studied this and we published it, and I can provide whatever. But if you look just quickly at the graph, that blue area is the time to first action. That's your system one, right? We can make people faster at moving in the right direction. What we also have to do is work on that system two. And what you can see is sort of the nursing students at the bottom, you know, they're in a completely receptive, I'm learning so much medicine, I don't know what to do with it, right? And you look at, say, the engine company, those guys are in system two, and it takes them longer because they're looking at structural problems in a scenario. They're looking at crowd control in a scenario. And so it really mirrored that system one, system two process based on the different demographics. We need to create adaptive experts. You know, the routine expert uses their existing knowledge to solve problems, but the adaptive expert combines the understanding of the problem and then uses reflection in order to solve complicated problems, and also to analyze when their problem solving decisions aren't working. And I think that's really critical. So I'll just close with this. You know, we use for first care, you know, this diagram we put out on social media and stuff. And I think a lot of times the world kind of thinks that CERT's going to be over there, right? Something's going to happen. People are on scene. The first responders are going to activate the CERT team. And I'm here to tell you fundamentally that is completely wrong, right? There is not an emergency response plan that is going to work that way. I think what's going to happen is the problem is going to come to you, and the CERT members are going to have to be leaders. And before anybody else is able to, think of the power of having trained adaptive leaders from your CERT community at the time something happens, and then everyone following after the fact. Yes, we can deploy later once someone takes incident control, and we can rehab the first responders, but I'm here to tell you that we need to train our CERT members to be ready at the time of the event. Jerry, that's what I've got. I think I should be done with about a minute to spare. Here's our information if you want to reach out to me. I appreciate the opportunity, and please find us on social media, friend us. I just can't tell you how proud I am to be here, and I hope this was helpful.
It was terrific. Thank you very much.